we talked about needing to move the needle from billions to trillions, and Louise just reiterate the importance of defining what that good looks like, and the journey with lots of unknowns. We need to try out different solutions, and along the way, there's a lot of challenges we'll face. So I have with me today Kate Hughes, the CEO of Resilient Water Accelerator at WaterAid, who was formerly an international climate change director at BASE here in the UK. We have Manuel Pulgar Vidal, who is the global leader of climate and energy at WWF, formerly environment minister in Peru. And finally, we have Tom Mitchell, the executive director at IIED. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we've granted them some mandate to talk about climate, nature, and society. So what are the challenges, and what are some of the concrete solutions? Because we talked about defining what that good looks like. So in order to get there, we need to understand the immediate challenges we're facing, and what are some of the solutions in your experience, where you sit and where you used to sit, that those solutions worked, and how those solutions sort of overcame the challenges. So first, Kate, tell us a little bit about what your experience was like, and how some of these solutions are helping to address those challenges.
Great, thank you, and no pressure, given there's an hour till your next break. So I hope we can keep this lively and entertaining for you, and thank you. And yes, so my background in working for the UK government on climate finance, so I'll take some perspectives from that, but also in my new role as well. And I think this is a scene setter, so I'm going to try and be a bit brief too, and hopefully lay some nuggets for your discussions through today and into tomorrow. And also, I was so tempted to talk about lots of nature-based solutions and societal impacts too, but I'm going to try not to tread on the toes of these two excellent speakers here as well. So I'll try and limit it a bit to kind of the climate side as well. And I think the biggest challenge, we keep on talking about scale, and how do we deliver at scale, which is absolutely necessary. I think the other half of that challenge is how do you do that at speed as well, and both of those elements are absolutely critical if we're going to deliver on this climate challenge that we're all facing. So I was going to kind of quickly try and outline 5 challenges as I see them from a kind of a variety of perspectives. There are lots of challenges, and I'm sure you'll all know that, but hopefully this gives a sense of some of them, and then 5 solutions as well that I've seen working too. So the first up, and it was a huge topic last week, it was a huge topic through the COPs, is actually the negotiations, the 100 billion, the commitments that governments have made to provide climate finance. This absolutely has to be delivered on. That is a sort of a non-negotiable. Countries have to step up to deliver this. There can't be any more excuses in terms of delivering the 100 billion, because that's a foundational element of what happens in terms of climate finance, the trust, and providing that level of grant finance as well. But what we can't do is just get het up on that and see that as the only element into this, as a stumbling block to other development and other kind of finance coming through as well. And also it often becomes a real tick box exercise if we're not careful. Oh, is it what is going to score as climate finance? Is this climate finance? Is this not? It just needs to be delivered, and we just need to kind of get on and deliver it without worrying about exactly definitions and so on. Secondly, I think a big challenge is, and actually this sort of is a conversation about trade-offs too. Should we be mainstreaming? Should we have dedicated funds? Now, for me, the big challenge here is that there's a lot of conversations about mainstreaming and doing that. And again, that's the foundation. That is the necessary but not sufficient bit. I still think and believe firmly that climate is still not happening at that scale and pace needed, and therefore we need dedicated focus, we need dedicated funds in order to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, and to lift this further, faster, deeper than just a mainstreaming commitment will get us. The third challenge is that not just one kind of finance will deliver this by itself. People will talk just about, grant finance or public finance, but we know it's way, way bigger than that. And last year, Stern and Songway brought out a great report which listed 5 kinds of finance, and they are all absolutely critical. Public finance, private finance, MDBs, philanthropy, and absolutely critical in this, carbon markets as well. We need all of those elements to come together and to work together to solve this solution. So the challenge is, how do we make all of those work together? The fourth one is the institutions that sit behind a lot of this as well, that address the challenge. There was a lot of talk last week as well about the MDBs, about the institutions that fund climate change and that take a lot of action in this area, but they are still grounded in the 1960s and how they were set up. I can't think of any other area where that thinking just hasn't evolved. Can you imagine in banks and in finance institutions, if you were still running your organizations in the same way as you were back in the 1960s, you would fall over. You would not be competitive. You would not be delivering. So that's the big challenge we need to rise to. But equally, there's a huge challenge here for the private sector. Too often, particularly in my role in the UK government, I would sit there and hear about this mythical wall of finance that was just waiting. If only the MDBs did this, if only countries did that, if only there were a toolkit here or something. That just doesn't cut it. The challenge now is for the private sector to lean in, to own this, and not to sit back and wait on the margins, but to actually get involved and create the solutions, the markets, and create that value. So what are those solutions? So 5 quick things that I've seen that address some of those challenges and solutions. So first of all, I really believe that we've got to do this at scale. And examples like the Climate Investment Fund, the Clean Technology Fund, which was working with sort of $10 billion. It invested in concentrated solar power in Morocco, the largest CSP in the world. It halved the global cost of CSP overnight because of the scale of what it was doing, bringing together the finance to do that. So that is absolutely critical. We need to have solutions which are replicable and aggregate small-scale actions so that they really have that kind of impact. They show that proof of concept, they show that acceleration, and carbon markets here, the solutions where you've been developing methodologies so that people can do this again and again and again. You're not starting with a blank piece of paper each time is absolutely critical. Solutions that deliver multiple outcomes. This isn't just about can we deliver a ton of carbon. Most of the great solutions that I see, and now leading the Resilient Water Accelerator, learning from all of these lessons, you have to deliver the solutions which tick lots and lots of boxes because nothing happens in isolation. So I've seen out in Bangladesh solar-powered, community-led projects which are providing clean water. If you've got clean water, you don't have to cut down firewood to clean your water. Therefore, you've got a carbon saving. You've got women who are employed. They can make choices. They're empowered. It's great for the community. They can sell that to other communities as well. It's better for irrigation and farming. The list goes on and on and on. So the best projects are those which really tap into those needs. The fourth one is finding finance which plays to the different parts in the supply chain, in that value chain. Each bit of finance should play its best role and only its best role. You shouldn't have actors trying to play the role of someone else in this, or you're not maximising the benefit. And funds like Climate Investor 2, there's also Climate Investor 1, do this where they bring together the funding for the design stage and the operation, for the construction, and then actually the long-term kind of operation and refinancing, using different financing models and blended finance to get that. And finally, it's about building capacity. The best solutions are those that work in country to build capacity of local communities. So again, it lasts for a long time. But also, I don't want to forget here too, it's not just about putting the onus on governments and communities for capacity. We have to build the capacity of the private sector to invest in these opportunities as well. So actually, they are coming to the table and designing it in tandem as well. So I really believe we've got challenges, but we've got lots of solutions.
No, that's great, Kate. And the last part on capacity really resonates with me because it's not just about vulnerable communities and least developed countries that are in need of capacity, but also private sector. I mean, the way Gold Standard works with private equities, we underestimated the need for capacity building in helping them integrate impact into their entire decision making. So it's that role of capacity building, I think it's really, really an important one. So I'm going to turn to Manuel for nature. I was at a One Forest Summit in Gabon, and someone said we need $800 million annually to conserve biodiversity. I was quite shocked with the number, and I'm sure that was a conservative number as well. So in scaling the finance, and especially in nature, what are some of the key challenges, and what kind of solutions have you seen in the place where you sit today and then in your experience?
Thank you, Maggie. And let me build based on what Kate has just mentioned. Nothing happened in isolation, because it is true. And my idea by answering your question, it is to try to defragment the debate. Because we have most of the pieces to bring solutions, but most of those pieces are strongly fragmented. So how to defragment it, how to integrate as a way to unlock the trillions, because that is the idea and the objective for today's session. So let me share with you some ideas because of that. The first one, it is about the vision. Probably something that we haven't yet appreciated well. It is how important it has been to get by consensus a collective vision. It is clear for climate. So the 1.5, the net zero, and resilience are three concepts that nobody is resisting, opposing, or challenging in any way. What it is good, any actor. And in some way, we have gotten good things by the global biodiversity framework for nature, despite that, unfortunately, the framework doesn't recognize in an express way the nature positive concept. But in some way, nature positive is there. If you go to the goal one, you will see that halt and reverse, it is related to nature positive. So I would like to insist that we have to continue working based in the nature positive concept. And also, if we can integrate net zero with nature positive, that could create a more clear vision on what exactly we are trying to achieve. So, vision, it is the first element. But that moves me to the second, something that it is so important for corporate decisions, even for countries, risk assessment. And it is clear because of the global risk outlook, this annual report by the World Economic Forum, that climate, water scarcity, and biodiversity are in the 4 top risks identified that can jeopardize economic growing and that can jeopardize corporations' profits. So it is so important to continue developing risk assessment and considering that it is not only because of climate, that it is hitting us every day, but also it is because nature. And I think that the best example of those risks, it has been the pandemics that has been that was created because of a zoonotic disease, that it is a combination of nature and climate reasons. It is clear that the pandemic started because of the lack of clear ways to address nature loss, and by not identifying the consequences of climate change. So that is the second one, risk. The third element, it is we do have not only to have standards, but to follow standards. And Luis has just talked about SBTI, the Science-Based Target Initiative. And it is fantastic what SBTI is doing. And let me be clear, I am board member of SBTI. But it is fantastic, because look, friends, SBTI, it is an institution that it is developing their work without any formal appointment of anybody in the UN system. It is an institution that has gotten not only their traction, but their legitimacy by working well, by defining and identifying what does it mean, the net zero. It has finished their work? Not yet. We know that not yet. We have a net zero, some critics, because we know how difficult it is to address the scope 3. We are still working in the beyond value chain mitigation, something that I'm going to refer later. We do need to define a more clear standard for the financial sector, that it is a different animal. It is not as an individual sector. The financial sector has their own dynamic, and we do need to define well the standard. So we are working on that. So we have that for climate. What happened with nature? Fortunately, also, we have the science-based target for nature, what it is called SBTN, or Science-Based Target Network. They have already approved, defined, a standard based on what it is called the mitigation hierarchy. So it is really important to continue working on defining standards, because it is the only way through which we will, or we could, recover credibility. Because remember what the UN Secretary General mentioned in Glasgow, we are losing credibility. We are having climate claims and climate pledges that are not true, or climate claims and pledges that nobody is following it. So we do need to define a more clear system as a way to make this system credible, because that would be the only way to unlock that trillion. It is because we are working based in a credible system. And also we have the gold standard, working not only in a standard, but also moving the standards into the frame of sustainability, what it is fantastic. So a standard, it is that fourth element. But also we do need to have the political signal. And I am a lawyer by training, but I understand well science and the economy. And it is important to follow the science, it is important to have economic incentive, but the political signals are key. And that political signals are unfortunately not happening well. We have the vision, what it is good, but we know how weak it is the current political process towards COP. Everybody is losing hope in the COP. The last meeting in Bonn, the intersessional, showed how difficult the process it is. Even worse, how much the war, because of Ukraine, Russia, it is affecting the process. That is making the negotiators to take at least 3 days just to manage those political fights within the multilateral process. Happened in Bonn, happened in Paris because of the plastics treaty negotiation, and it is happening around the world. But that political weakness or difficulties are also happening domestically. And we do need to encourage our countries to strengthen their climate plans and disease, to define their long-term strategies. Look, friends, I am Peruvian. My country, unfortunately, it is one of those countries that has not yet defined the 2050 vision. The only way to have a good climate plan and to send a good political signal to any investor, it is by showing what do we want to be in 2050. What are our expectations in energy, in transport, in cities, in industry, in circular economy, and in nature for sure, in cutting deforestation, because in the developing world, mostly in tropical areas, our main source of emissions, it is deforestation. So let's continue encouraging countries to do that, but not only for mitigation purposes, even for adaptation. It is a bit sad that despite that we have demand push countries to prepare their national adaptation plans, just 32 countries of 200 of the world have already prepared the national adaptation plan. And then we are crying because the consequences of climate change. We don't know how to address the floods, how to address the droughts, how to address what are the typical consequences of climate change. And now we are moving into what some people is calling from the voluntary basis to the regulatory one. For many people, the only way to make this system more credible, it is by having it well regulated. That is something that it has been proposed by the Secretary General. That is something that it has been proposed by the high-level expert group. And look, despite that I am a lawyer, I don't think that that is a solution. More than regulations, I do believe in incentives. How can we incentivize the fulfillment of the standard as a way that it can be seen as mandatory, not because of regulation. Because also I am doubting how to regulate in the global arena by UN. Do we think that the UN could develop a mandatory system because of regulation? In a domestic level, just in the north, or in the north, in the south, or in each one of the countries, so 200 regulations to fulfill with a standard. So that is why we do need to take some more time to think how to create the incentive, the economic incentive, because climate and nature, it is about the economy. Despite that I was strongly involved in the Paris Agreement, I am used to saying, if you wish, forget the Paris Agreement, because the Paris Agreement won't punish you if you don't fulfill. Will punish the economy. It is about the economy. The economy will leave you behind the others if you are not able to fulfill with the climate responsibilities. And I know, Maggie, that probably I am taking too much time. I am following, where is Luis Amaral? I love Luis when I heard 3 times to say, to conclude, that is a perfect way to do it. And then we have the role of markets. Sorry, Luis, I'm just kidding. The role of markets. Markets are a key element, but are not working well by now. And you know why? And I am referring to, for example, voluntary carbon markets. Because we have to define well what is that role that nature could play in address climate. Because it is true, when many organizations are against the carbon market, it is not that they are crazy or that they don't believe on the market. What they are saying it is, I don't want to have flexible mechanisms that can divest the main obligation or priority that it is for a real decarbonization in your C scopes by a transformational change of your manufacturing process. That is the priority, and it is true. So that is why we do need urgently to have the beyond value chain mitigation standard to define what are those residual emissions or what are, because of the beyond value chain, amount of carbon that you can neutralize or compensate in a way. Because offsets are not bad by nature. The problem is when you try to offset because you are trying to avoid your responsibility. So we do need to sort and to solve that problem. If not, it will be exactly the same. So that role of the market, and that is why the importance of the voluntary carbon markets integrity initiative and toolkit and claim code that it will be released, I think, in the coming days, on Thursday or Wednesday, if I am not confused. So it is good to have this kind of high-quality principle for a high-quality intervention. And finally, remember that when we think about finance, it is not about 100 billion. 100 billion, despite that the countries have not fulfilled with 100 billions, we know that those billions are peanuts when the cost of walking the transition costs trillions. Just for climate, let's add nature. So the point is, what can we do? So remember that there are 3 ways to see the finance available mechanisms: the public, the private, and the multilateral. When we think about the public, we have available mechanisms that bonds, the importance of the debt swaps that fortunately are currently happening. Ecuador has just gotten for Galapagos a debt swap, but I think it is a good idea. And remember, friend, we are not reinventing the wheel. The debt swap, it was a fantastic mechanism to promote protected areas in many places of the world. That also has been well managed by very transparent foundations or funds, public-private funds in many countries. In case of Peru, Profonampe showed to be so effective in managing those funds and making the protected area systems to grow. So we are just taking back that system and to promote it for climate and nature purposes. We have the coalition of ministries of finance that we do need to strengthen it. It is important to have them more active in the climate debate. And we have, for sure, subsidies. Probably that is the poor cousin, and that is the most important. We do need to eliminate perversive subsidies that it is difficult in the transition. When we think about private, it is good that we are moving toward disclosure. But do we think that disclosure it is enough? No, it is not. Disclosure is the first step. We do need to move towards alignment of portfolio to the net zero. That is a different thing. And it will take time, and that is why the importance of having a clear standard. And then we have the multilateral. That means Global Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facility, the Adaptation Fund, the Loss and Damage. I am wondering how good it is, again, to fragment all those funds. Probably we do need to see how can we be more effective. But the big elephant in the room, it is the MDB reform. Because the MDB reform could help, could strengthen, and could help to unlock the trillion. But how is it is that? How easy it is to change the culture of the World Bank to say, now you have to think in a climate debate and go beyond countries and think, for example, in the Amazon landscape. Who will assume that loan? The Amazon? The Amazon, it is not a country. It is not a political entity. So we have to bring some concrete solutions to that. If not, that MDB reform, despite of the new president and his willingness, of the World Bank and his willingness, it won't be possible. So again, friends, last phrase, let's integrate all of these elements. Defragment the debate as the only way to unlock that trillion. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. I think it's a really important point to not think in a fragmented way and think about that holistic solution, especially when it comes to nature. I think all three components, that the topics that we're tackling inevitably enter into an integrated system. So, Tom, societal values and societal outcomes, I guess the people are underpinning basically all the topics that Kate and Manuel covered. How do you see the challenges in scaling the effort to support the just transition, the societal value to be fully integrated into climate and nature perspective? I'm sure IIED's leadership in 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was quite a lonely job, but now everybody's talking about this. What are some of the challenges and solutions you've seen?
Thank you. So maybe for those who don't know IIED, and I appreciate that many may be new to the organization, we were set up in 1972 as a policy research think tank, but with a focus on practical solutions. And what was key in 1972 was that it brought together, for the first time within an organizational title, environment and development, recognizing that economic growth couldn't come at the cost of the environment. And actually, it was also just shortly after that that the founder of IIED, Barbara Ward, helped to coin the term sustainable development. And so really, we've been hosting sessions, not dissimilar to this, maybe with a different audience and with a much narrower audience, for a long time, asking questions of how do you scale up a model of development or a model of progress that doesn't put environment at risk and doesn't put people at risk as well. And I think where we are now is that we do need to look at a model where we're focusing on what we scale up, but we're also focusing on a model of what we scale down. And that society, I think, can see that at the moment we're caught in a tension between dramatic focus on kind of net zero targets, but at the same time continuing to perpetuate a system that has been there for a long time that fundamentally does create harm to the environment and to people. And with that, I wanted to just highlight a few things on the scale-up side that I think are really important, particularly from the perspectives of the communities that IIED works with. We, for 51 years, have been working in partnership with communities all around the world to understand what works for them, to put their voice at the forefront, in design of investments as well. So on the scale-up side, I think we need to be really cautious about continuing to talk about projects the whole time. Projects simply tend not to work for the fullness of the kind of societal need. What we need is the landscape, the ecosystem-based approach, the understanding of the fact that you can have negative consequences if you just focus on one project with one outcome. That's because societies are complex. And complex beings cannot be dealt with just with single projects, single solutions, and predetermined outcomes. So if I had advice in that regard, get in and design with communities. Design with communities in a way that you're working on whole portfolios for them of action that integrates their development, social safeguards, environmental protection, and climate action. That's really important, and that means working with a new body of organizations than you may traditionally have worked with, and to not run the idea that you can develop a project that helps societies off a spreadsheet with a data set sat in Canary Wharf. Simply doesn't work. So find a new network of partners. Secondly, and I fully agree with the other speakers here, we're being gaslighted around a 100 billion target. 100 billion target is the kind of thing where governments don't quite want to achieve because it means that we continue to talk about a 100 billion target and when we will achieve it. Not fundamentally the fact that actually if you look at the total climate finance transfers to countries, massively dwarfed by debt repayments. So it's only now that we're starting to really focus on the fact that unless we can tackle debt, then actually there is going to be no success in terms of climate action or environmental action. And the other dimension of this is that we're often focusing now on climate action to the detriment of the provision of some of the basic services in different countries, health, education, welfare systems. Because all of a sudden the climate target is the sexiest thing around and you need to direct everything in that direction. When on the other hand, we've got massive debt repayments that mean that countries can't support their basic services. So we do need to understand from a societal perspective that these priorities cannot be at the cost of poor people or of vulnerable people or those in exposed situations. Just to reiterate this point kind of one more time here is that what we're seeing at the moment is that the transfers of money into those countries may as well not be directed towards climate action at all. You may as well take that money if you're a UK government or a German government, walk down the street and give it directly to Goldman Sachs or to HSBC or JP Morgan, because that's the way our international finance system is set up at the moment. The nature of that debt dimension really does prevent the opportunity for countries to take their obligations seriously under their NDCs and so on. So we have got some structural dimensions to tackle, and what IIED is calling the hidden handbrakes in our system. One more before I stop from a social perspective. One of those other hidden handbrakes is the fact that we have 3,500 trade treaties around the world, bilateral treaties, multilateral treaties, of which the vast majority give protection to fossil fuel investors. And those protections to fossil fuel investors mean that if you're a government looking to set ambitious climate action targets and to take policy measures to strengthen climate action, you run the risk, and a very significant risk, of being sued by those fossil fuel investors that see their assets potentially depreciating in value. You see this at the moment in Canada, being sued by US fossil fuel companies. You've seen this in Italy, being sued by UK fossil fuel companies. And around the world, you have ministries of finance running scared about the fact that ambitious climate action means that they'll end up in court being sued for very significant amounts of money from fossil fuel investors. So let's get this right. There are things that we have to scale up in terms of the flow of money, the design of programs, portfolio-based approaches, and there are also things that we have to rapidly scale down, including countries drowning in debt, including the fact that we've got fossil fuel protections in many, many treaties. So if we're talking about issues of scale, it's on that positive ledger and on that negative ledger. And that requires us to work really very much in partnership. And I want to just reiterate what other panelists have said as well. This has to be about a coalition of action between investors, standard setters, governments, those local communities that we need to make sure are at the forefront of climate action, philanthropists and so on. And that requires intermediary organizations to build platforms for success and to work very closely with locally led community-level design. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It was quite refreshing to hear about what we need to scale down, because often we really focus on scale, and scale. So what do we need to scale down? And I think all of you sort of brought out the elephant in the room. You know, how do we sort of make that structural change and make sure that from a project portfolio level, the things that, at least from my perspective, Gold Standard can contribute is how do we sort of include those people, communities from the design, not just focus on project level, but also look at portfolio landscape level and policy level. So really good points that I'm taking away. So I had follow-up questions, but given now I'm seeing orange numbers popping up, we have 5 minutes left. So I want to open it to the floor. If there are any questions to our panelists here, we'll keep it quite brief. Maybe we'll take about 2 to 3 questions. Any questions for Kate, Manuel, and Tom? Yes, the gentleman. Could you say your name, the organization?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Max Song. I'm the founder and CEO of Carbon Base. And my question actually is for Manuel. I was thinking a lot about what you said, on 2 marks, right? One is that the Amazon's not a country, and so unfortunately it doesn't have the same rules and protections as countries are afforded. In the US, there's a fascinating law, a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United, which actually unlocked unlimited campaign financing, and it was argued on the basis of corporations being legal people. So at Davos this year, I heard some people talking about putting nature on the board of companies, actually using legal structures to create wrappers of environmental resources and allowing them to be participatory elements in the corporate and financial scheme, like treating Amazon like a company or even like a sovereign entity. So I would love to hear your remarks on the idea that we can actually innovate on the legal constructs by which we actually attribute value to nature and giving them a voice and participation. And then beyond that, the second point is the challenge of REDD+ today is that the forest does not have value unless it is under the imminent threat of being cut down. And that is a backwards hostage-taking situation. Unless you have someone threatening the forest, it doesn't produce credits. Can we actually have a nature-forward view where we actually say this forest naturally just has value? It is creating natural dividends for the planet, and we should be attributing those financial markers, in a different attribute. Thank you.
Can we take 1 or 2 more? Another question from the floor to Kate or Tom? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Rajesh from Carbon Impact Capital. My question is on the unintended consequences of SBTI. And it's I find it ironical that we are starting the conference in a room right next to Guardian and starting with SBTI. And please take it in the right spirit. I love being in a room with people full of commitment to climate. But my concern, speaking on behalf of the Global South, is that SBTI is strongly prioritizing internal emission reduction. If we look at it from a planetary perspective, it is moving money away from the Global South, moving away from low-cost solutions where an offset can reduce or avoid or capture emissions at $5 to $10, and moving it into solutions which may cost $100 or $500. So it is costing us more, moving money away from Global South and pushing it towards solutions and technologies which may not exist now. And therefore, that is a concern. I just don't know how to address it honestly. Because when we speak to corporates, a standard excuse is, we have to focus on internal emissions first. And this is a residual emissions, which is outside the supply chain. Now, whose supply chain is the bottom 1 or 2 billion people going to be in? They are the worst affected by climate change. They will probably form less than 1% of the market revenues of the corporates, and therefore should we ignore them? That's a question for SBTI.
Manuel, would you like to address? And then Kate and Tom, if you want to compliment, please.
Thank you. I will address the first question. It is interesting because you are asking me what are the legal constraints to address the lack of value to nature. And probably it is like a poll here. It could be legal problems, it could be economic, or it could be the lack of combination of both. How many of you think that the problem it is lack of regulation or lack of a legal approach? Could you raise your hand? And how many of you think that it is an economic issue? interesting. So the point is, this legal economic, it is a chicken egg thing. So how to sort and how to address the lack of successful in giving value to nature, it is a key element. And let me make one reflection, and probably I am wrong. Tell me if I am wrong. Many people is currently criticizing around the world that we are having a too narrow carbon tunnel. So most of things that we are thinking about are because of carbon. And yes, and the critique, it is valid. What that critique it is saying, it is, and you are forgetting health, you are forgetting nature, you are forgetting development, you are forgetting blah, 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 poverty, etc. But the critique is correct, yes. But we can build upon of that critique even more. Because the point it is carbon has made us more able to address a problem by defining standards, metric, by understanding, and also because climate it is showing, because of its climate extreme event, its consequences. So everybody is acting, and climate it's becoming an economic thing. So my point with that critique it is, yeah, it is true. We are having a probably too narrow carbon tunnel, but because of that carbon tunnel, we are bringing some others into the table. We are bringing the One Health approach. We have adopted ocean as part of the debate. Forest, now we are working with fresh water, and we can do it with many other topics. So what I am trying to say, we can use some of those solutions that are based in the climate debate to give value to nature, and let me be more clear. If we are, as in my case, from the developing world, in which main source of emission in the Amazon, the main source of emission it is deforestation and land use change. 63% of our emissions are because deforestation and land use change. So yeah, we have to address the energy problem, we have to address the industry, we have to address the transport one for sure. But our main source, it is nature. So the point it is how effective it could be nature-based solutions to do that. So that is why I am so against this Bolivian position that it is saying, no, nature-based solutions, it is the way to commoditize nature and to put nature in hands of the market. That is not true. And they are saying, let's focus on the Pachamama. Sounds fantastic, the Pachamama. But how can we deal with the Pachamama? The point it is that we can use nature-based solutions as a mechanism to fully address our main source of emission with an economic focus. Because nature-based solutions, it is a combination of keeping an ecosystem integrity plus addressing a clear societal challenge that it could be water scarcity, water security, food security, disaster risk management, climate change, biodiversity and development, and by having or by bringing social benefits and with a indigenous rights-based approach. So if we are able to do that, probably we could give some value to nature because, friends, we are failing. We are failing in giving value to nature. And that is why illegal mining, for example, it is growing because we cannot compete with the price of gold. If you think in the Amazon and you see what is the current value of the forest and you see what is the value of gold, immediately you know why people is extracting in an illegal way that gold in the Amazon. So we do need to strengthen our ability to give that value to nature. And that can create also the evolution of the regulation, because it is not just to enact laws, it is to create an economic dynamic. Last point, but remember that nature-based solutions, it is not a single carbon market instrument. You could have MBS with a non-market approach, and also that is important. And the point it is that if we are able to connect MBS, nature-based solutions, into the climate plans, NDCs, or make it part of the long-term strategies, or making part of the biodiversity plans that are called NBSAPs, National Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services Plans, I think it is called, that the countries have to prepare that are a public policy document, probably we could be more effective in creating this balance in between the economics and the regulation.
Great, thank you. Kate and Tom, would you like to compliment or address some of the comments that we heard from the audience?
Sure. A huge question and a really important one, and this is not going to do any justice to it at all, given the time that we've got. But I think, it is a huge point about how do we actually make sure the finance that is flowing is having the impact that it needs to have in a fair, equitable, inclusive way. And there is a huge focus, obviously, on mitigation and how do we reduce emissions, but we also need to think very much about how do we build resilience and how do we help countries, communities adapt to the impacts of climate change. And that's absolutely got to be rooted in those countries, in those communities where that need is greatest and where those impacts are being felt. And that interconnected nature of all of these elements means that we have to make sure those flows are getting to the global south, to the countries where it is needed. So 4 quick points. I do genuinely think that actually carbon markets have got a huge role here, and the voluntary carbon market in making sure that actually that finance is getting to where it's needed, to where the solutions are happening, and actually where those solutions can be incredibly cost effective. Because actually, part 2, I don't think that necessarily the solutions, and it can be an excuse again, are about the big technological solutions and somehow it's waiting in a warehouse somewhere if someone can only invent it. We know most of the solutions, we know what we need to do, and we know that we need to then direct the finance to make those solutions happen at the scale and where they are needed most. And that is also true of adaptation. The Global Commission on the Economics of Water have said, we know how to get clean water to people. We know what we need to do to bring water security to people. We just now need to make sure that investment is happening. And I think that's the key point here. Again, there's no more excuses. We need to get on and fund it. This isn't also about quick fixes. I think that's the third point too. We need to act quickly. It's not about quick fixes. We need to have that deep economic, long-term investment. It's not about playing up here and tinkering. It's about really making sure that investment is happening at a systemic level too. And I think the fourth point, which I'm sure will come through all of your conversations here as well today and tomorrow, is about integrity. We need to make sure we are doing things which have high integrity, which are really delivering and aren't about greenwashing, but are really having the impact. Otherwise, we're just cheating ourselves and we're cheating the planet, and that's on a hiding to nothing.
Thank you.
Very briefly then, yeah. I was in Bangladesh 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we've been doing some work with WaterAid, actually, looking at the impacts of climate change and loss and damage. And I would just encourage everybody here in the discussions that we have to put into perspective what they are experiencing in those parts of Bangladesh, just to give you a sense. We have sex for water, because the water is now so saline you can't drink it. And that the only way to get access to water is by a woman in the community selling her body for sex to be able to get access to bottled water. We have a situation where farmer suicides are accelerating at a huge rate because no longer can you make money off the farms that you're running. We have a massive increase in internal displacement, 2,000 people a day arriving in Dhaka, and in a situation where they're moving into modern slavery, essentially debt-bonded labor. We have a situation where women are going through elective hysterectomies to make themselves more employable because there are no jobs. There are direct relationships here based on the research that we've done, based on the impacts of climate change, and based on the fact that resources are not getting to the communities that need it most. Our own research from IIED highlights that less than 10% of international climate finance, public or private, actually gets to communities and helps them in any way. And in fact, some of the evaluations that there are out there highlight that actually over half of those make things worse and not better when the money gets there. So let me just put it, that's really the perspective that I think we need to bring into all of our discussions here. Yes, there are solutions out there. Yes, the money can get to where it needs to get to. Yes, we can design in a better way. Yes, we can do things at a lower cost. But let's make sure that we do so in such a way where what we're seeing in Bangladesh doesn't become the norm for every single country on the planet. Thanks.